The secret my parents kept for decades changed my life completely. Growing up, my parents, Raquel and Walter, were the kind of people everyone admired, steady, reliable, and seemingly without a care in the world. They ran a small but successful bookstore in our quiet town, and their lives were as predictable as the seasons. There was a comfort in that routine, a sense of stability that I never questioned. But looking back now, I realize how naive I was. It wasn't until after my mother died that everything changed. My mom had been sick for a while, cancer, a brutal, drawn-out battle that left my dad a shell of the man he used to be. I was in my late 20s when she passed, and I moved back home to help my father run the bookstore and adjust to life without her. It was a strange time for both of us. We were grieving, but at the same time, life continued moving forward, even if we didn't feel ready to keep up. A few months after the funeral, Dad asked me to help him clean out the attic. It was something he had been putting off for years, but with Mom gone, it seemed like the right time to finally go through the boxes of old photos, letters, and forgotten relics of the past. I remember the day vividly. It was raining outside, the steady patter of raindrops on the roof providing a soft background noise as we worked through the clutter. Most of it was the usual stuff, old clothes, baby pictures of me and my younger brother Martin, and dusty souvenirs from family vacations we'd taken years ago. But then, tucked away in the back corner of the attic, behind a stack of yellowing newspapers, we found it. An old, weathered trunk. It was unlike anything else up there, heavy, made of dark wood, with brass latches that had tarnished over time. I glanced at my dad, expecting him to know what it was, but the look on his face told me he was just as surprised as I was. "I don't remember this," he muttered, kneeling down in front of the trunk. "It must have been your mother's." I watched as he hesitated for a moment before undoing the latches and lifting the lid. Inside, there were stacks of letters, dozens, maybe even hundreds, tied together with ribbons, their edges yellowed with age. Underneath them were a few old journals, the covers worn and faded, as well as some legal documents I couldn't quite make out from where I stood. "What is all this?" I asked, reaching for one of the journals. "I'm not sure," Dad said, his brow furrowing. He pulled out one of the letters, carefully untying the ribbon and unfolding it. His face paled as he read the words, and after a few moments, he silently handed it to me. I took the letter from him, my hands trembling slightly as I scanned the handwriting. It was my mother's, no doubt about that. But as I read the words, my heart began to race. "My dearest Linda," the letter began, "I've carried this secret for too long, and I don't know how much longer I can bear it. It weighs on me every day, and though I've built a life for myself here with Walter, I know I'll never be free of the past. You're the only one who knows the truth, and I'm writing this to remind myself of the decision I made all those years ago, to keep the secret, for everyone's sake. If anyone ever found out, it would ruin everything." I froze. My mind raced. Linda was my mother's best friend from when they were younger, someone she had always kept in touch with, though I hadn't seen her in years. What secret could she possibly have kept from all of us? And why had she confided in Linda instead of my father? "Dad," I said slowly, "do you have any idea what this is about?" He shook his head, his face etched with confusion and fear. "I've never seen this letter before. I don't know what your mother was talking about." But I could tell from the look in his eyes that he was just as terrified as I was. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. What was this secret my mother had been carrying for so long? Why had she hidden it from us? I kept going back to that trunk, reading more of the letters, hoping to piece together the truth. Most of them were similar, my mother writing to Linda, confessing her fear and guilt over something in her past. But there were no details, no clear answers. The journals were even more cryptic. My mother had written about her day-to-day life, but every now and then, there would be a vague reference to the decision or the burden she was carrying. Whatever this secret was, it haunted her. I had to know the truth. One afternoon, I drove to Linda's house. She still lived a few towns over, in the same house she had shared with her late husband. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral, but when I knocked on the door, she welcomed me in, her face lighting up with a warm, familiar smile. "Martha," she said, hugging me tightly. "It's so good to see you. How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "I'm managing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's about my mom." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course. What is it?" I took a deep breath, pulling the letter from my bag. "I found this in the attic. It's a letter my mom wrote to you. About a secret she was keeping." Linda's face went pale as she took the letter from me, her hands shaking as she unfolded it. She read it in silence, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, regret, maybe. Or fear. "Martha," she said quietly, "there's something you need to know. Something your mother and I swore we'd never tell anyone." I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "The truth is," Linda continued, her voice trembling, "Walter isn't your biological father." The room seemed to tilt as Linda's words sank in. "Walter isn't your biological father." I stared at her, my mouth dry, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what she had just said. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "That can't be true. You're saying my dad, Walter, he's not my real father." Linda sighed, her eyes filled with sadness. "I'm so sorry, Martha. Your mother and I never wanted this to come out. She was afraid of what it would do to you, to Walter, to the family. But I can't keep it from you any longer. You deserve to know the truth." I felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself and my family, was built on a lie. I didn't even know what to say, how to process this bombshell. "Who is he then?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "Who's my real father?" Linda hesitated, as if she was weighing whether to tell me more. Finally, she sat down on the couch and motioned for me to sit beside her. I sank into the seat, my hands shaking. "His name was Martin," she said softly. "He and your mother were involved before she met Walter. It was brief, but intense. She found out she was pregnant with you just before she and Martin split up. He left town and never knew about you. When she met Walter, she decided to keep it a secret. She didn't want you to grow up knowing you were the product of an affair." "An affair?" My mother, the woman who had always been so devoted to my father, had been involved with someone else. I couldn't wrap my head around it. So she just lied to everyone. To me? To my dad? I asked, my voice rising with anger. She let Walter raise me without ever telling him the truth. Linda looked at me with pained eyes. "Yes. It wasn't easy for her, Martha. She loved Walter deeply, and he loved you like his own. She didn't want to destroy that. She believed it was better this way." I stood up, pacing the room as my thoughts raced. But she lied. My entire life, she lied to me. How could she do that? How could she keep something this big from us? Linda's face softened with sympathy. "Your mother was trying to protect you. She thought she was doing the right thing. But as the years went on, the secret weighed on her more and more. That's why she confided in me. She needed someone to talk to." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The woman I had always looked up to, the woman I thought I knew so well, had been hiding the truth about my very existence. And now she was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked, my voice shaking. How am I supposed to move on from this? Linda reached for my hand, her touch gentle. Martha, I know this is a lot to take in. But your mother loved you, and so does Walter. That hasn't changed. You're still his daughter in every way that matters. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. But it's not the same, Linda. Everything's different now. The drive back to my parents' house was a blur. I couldn't think straight, couldn't stop replaying Linda's words in my head. Martin. My real father. A man I had never even met, who had no idea I existed. And Walter, the man who had raised me, who had been there for me every step of the way, he wasn't my biological father. How could I ever look at him the same way again? When I got home, I found Dad sitting in the living room, flipping through the pages of an old photo album. He looked up when I walked in, smiling softly. Hey, sweetheart. You've been gone a while. Everything okay? I stared at him, my chest tightening with a mix of guilt and anger. How could he sit there, so unaware of the secret that had been kept from him for decades? How could I tell him the truth, knowing it would destroy him? I went to see Linda, I said, my voice shaking. His brow furrowed. Linda? What for? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Something I found out. It's about Mom. He set the photo album aside, his expression filled with concern. What is it, Martha? I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They streamed down my face as I sat down across from him, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Mom had a secret, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She had an affair before she met you. And she got pregnant. I'm not, I choked on the words, struggling to get them out. I'm not your biological daughter. The room fell into a heavy silence. Dad stared at me, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and hurt. For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, his eyes wide, as if trying to process what I had just told him. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. What are you saying, Martha? That you're not mine. I wiped at my tears, my heart breaking at the sight of him. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't know either. I found letters in the attic. Letters from Mom to Linda. She kept it a secret all these years. He looked down at his hands, his face pale. I raised you. I loved you like my own. How could she do this? I reached for his hand, my tears falling freely now. You're still my dad. You're the only dad I've ever known. This doesn't change that. But he pulled his hand away, standing up abruptly. It changes everything, Martha. Everything. The days that followed were a blur of silence and grief. Dad withdrew from me, spending most of his time locked away in his office. I could see the pain in his eyes whenever we crossed paths, but he couldn't bring himself to talk to me. I didn't blame him. I had dropped a bombshell that had shattered the life he thought he knew. I tried to reach out to Martin, my biological father, but every attempt to find him led to a dead end. It was as if he had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but a faint memory of who he had once been. In the end, I was left with more questions than answers, and a family that felt irreparably broken. One evening, a few weeks later, Dad finally came to me. His face was tired, his eyes red from sleepless nights. Martha, he said quietly, sitting down beside me on the couch. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About your mother, about you, about everything. I looked at him, my heart heavy with guilt. I'm sorry, Dad. I never wanted to hurt you. He shook his head. It's not your fault. You didn't ask for any of this. And neither did I. But I've realized something. It doesn't matter whose blood runs through your veins. You're my daughter. I raised you, and I'll always be your father. Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. I love you, Dad. I love you too, Martha, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. And that's something that will never change.